Hi, welcome back. So we are in Chapter 3 HCCV1 project at the outline workflow of the project. Since we have established the essential seed of the project and we created the UI model, it is time now to look for a second model that we think it's going to be quite a bit important, and that is the DB model. Why do we need DB model? Now let's get back to our original design, see where the DB model could make a huge sense. Now, in the ad cases, this is where the DB model might make a huge sense. Imagine we said we're gonna enter these fields here, right? And then we're gonna load the image by clicking here from somewhere where we're gonna actually import the image. So we will then have a number of entries here. For example, the case ID number, the patient age, some description, and normal or pneumonia. As we said, just we need to add the class. Later on, we're going to be checking whether what we are saying is true or not. The ID, the age, description, and the label, plus is the image. Where are they going to be saved? Of course, we need a database, and that's why we're going to be using the SQLite 3. So here what we want to do, we want to create a folder, we call it DB, and of course inside we're going to create init. Then we're going to create a DB main. This is going to be the module holder name. This is the module folder, and inside here we're going to create a main class for the database. Now in this project I have used a primitive way of actually handling the database. In the second project we're going to make it better, because the way that I'm doing right now, it's not the perfect one for production standards, but just wanted to walk you through how you could actually understand the concept essentially, and then you can evolve on your own as well. Let's go ahead and create this backend module. We have DB folder. Inside I create the init. Now this become module in this case, and then I create the DB main.py. As you can see here, it is a class, call it with a capital letter, DB main CLS class. I didn't need any constructor, just I needed number of functions inside that I will be utilizing later. Obviously, we need to generalize the path, because usually we don't know where this application will be installed in a machine. So you cannot use an absolute path. That's why we could rely on the operating system.path function, which it take an argument which actually going to search for the absolute path of the file that is run, and then it will return the absolute path. This is the first step, and I make it in a global form so I can access to it later within the class. In database module, what do we need? What are the functions? The first function, of course, to create database table. I'm not going to teach you again how to create that, but I'm going to show you the normal structure of SQLite 3, which is actually just the standard way of writing any or creating any database entry. So the structure is the same as we have introduced before. Always is a good practice to use a try, except, and finally, in case of any error could happen. Finally, that is to close the SQL connection. Usually it will be called one time just to create the database. So what do we need? We need an SQL string format, and the SQL string format, basically what it does, a string variable with 3 quotes. I like to use this one better than double quotes. Next thing, of course, we're going to use create table, and if it does not exist, I want you to create that table, and I call it patient table. So I'll be just creating one table, seems to be for this case is more than enough. What are the attributes of this table? Basically, we're going to start with the ID integer, primary key, so it will be increment automatically. Basically, what I'm doing here, actually, I'm just filling up these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 actually element of the table. So then we get the age of the patient, and it's going to be integer, obviously not null, so we'll have to fill them all. All of them is not null. The description, I just give 50 characters, that's enough. Now, before I move to the image, how we're going to store the image, I would like just to say the status is going to be an integer, either 0 or 1. Now, how about the image? How are we going to store the image in the database? Well, the recommended format is to use blob. And what's a blob? Basically, it is to create an image, convert that into a binary format. So we need to convert the image into a binary format if we want to store it inside this database. We're going to see how we're going to do that in a while. But basically, this is the actual element of patient table. Of course, the standard format, you create SQL connection by connecting to the database. Now I'm using the directory path, and of course I am adding the extension because I will be just reaching out up to DB, up to here. So I need to create name for the database. So basically it will get the path and then it will fill the name of the database. Done, then you create the cursor, and then you execute the actual string that we have just filled up here and print that is successful. In case of exception, please print for me that exception, and finally make sure if the connection is okay and everything, close it, and here we go. So this function will be used only one time just to create the database. I already executed that, and of course this is the database. I cannot of course open the database here, but you can use any available tool that it can show you. Now here I'm using this online tool for SQL Viewer website simply by accessing open, and this is the database. If I open it, you could see that is the table patient. And these are the entry, the ID, the image, data name, the age, everything is in as we have actually requested exactly. What are the function? How you're going to interact? It's the simple CRUD function to create, to make inquiry, to insert, and to delete. That's all. So this is exactly what are the functions our following should be. Once again, this is not the perfect way of doing so because this is quite a bit static. So instead of that, in the second application, we're going to make this better performance. So insert into table, the format again, just write your string of query, insert into patient table. You can insert the image, the age, description, and the patient status. And finally, you put on these values, as we said, except the ID, which is going to be incremented automatically. And of course, I'm going to use here the question mark because they are not going to be static entry, but they are going to be provided. That's why this function insert is going to ask you to have a patient data kind of a list. All right, so it expects this to be a list where the first one is going to be correspond to the image ID name, the second to the age, third to the description, then the image case, which is the image itself, and the patient status. This is again not the perfect way of doing so, but just wanted to show you a primitive way anyway. So once you are done, access to the SQL. This is the same connect format that we've been talking about using the database directory path we defined earlier, and we use with SQL connection because using with here is going to close the database in case you forgot to do so. And be careful, the values have to be in a tuple format. So as you can see, this is a tuple format. When we click this add case, we're going to read these fields, prepare them, and send them to the database, calling this function insert to table. Another function to select, which is retrieving information. Well, I'm going to give you a value, which is you are going to the same table, and based on the value that I'm providing, in this case, going to be the ID case, I want to go to the database and pull the information all. So that's why I say select all from the patient table given the ID. So we need to provide the ID if we call this function in particular. Same exact thing, call the SQL connection, and then execute with, create the cursor, execute this, and give me the value. And the value have to be in a tuple form exactly like so. And don't forget the comma, by the way, otherwise you will end up with a problem. And then after that, retrieve this, fetch all the information matching that query as a row and return. If I go to the view case here, and I should have like kind of a list here, later we'll see how populate this. but I should be retrieving all the cases here. So this is another inquiry, maybe to retrieve all, not specific ID, but here imagine I click on one of the cases. I want to go to the database. Whatever I clicked here is going to go and inquire with that ID and then retrieve the data and view them here. The next function, select all, we said we're going to populate this list case. So that's why this one here, say, well, select all is simpler. Select all from patient table. That's what it does. So if I call this function, it will go and select everything from the database. And then we have another one we call select the last from the table. So for some reason later, maybe while we are working, I discovered that I need just the last entry in the database. For a reason we will actually find out by ourselves. So that's why I have to do this. That's why I said this is a primitive way. It's not the perfect way. I should have better presentation, but I just wanted to show you primitive way once again. Okay, so you go to the table, select all from patient table where ordered by the row ID descent limit 1. This format here exactly as been recommended by the documentation of SQLite to retrieve the last entry in the database and retrieve that last entry. Finally, of course, deleting, it is the same, just delete from the patient table where the ID is equal. So when this case is going to happen, well, if I have one case here, if I click on it, I select the case, I click delete button, right? I should be able to delete the case. So that click will retrieve the ID of the case where I am standing, and you go and delete from the database. And finally, you could also have delete all from the database. That's all. So here we have just managed to create the database class module. Now this is ready to be interacted, to talk to us. If we go back to our actually essential UI main window here, we can go and we say, well, from the database, I want you to call that class, and then we can interact with it. But this is not what I'm going to do. Actually, I don't want to interact direct interact between the main window and the database. Why don't we create another model that's going to handle this thing as we request, of course. That's why next what I do suggest to do, it is to go and try to do some functionality. For example, if we would like to do some adding. So let's say the main window is running, I put these values and I click add. That should be going somewhere, executing that add. I do the operation of sanitizing these values. Why don't we create another model? And we call it action, for example, model is going to handle that thing. So that's why if you watch carefully here, I created another case called actions. And those actions handling two important things: list actions and button actions. List actions, why? Because you could see like in the case of the view stack, this list, when we start the application, we need to go to the database and select all the cases that exist in the database if they are cases. So this is populating the list. Instead of doing this again directly from the main window, why don't we just up on the starting of the application, we can find a way that somehow we connect to a function. This function is connected to a model of action, is going to populate that. So let's go ahead now and try to explore these two modules inside the action. Of course, don't forget, inside the action module, we're gonna initiate the init again. All right, in the button here, there are two important functions. Again, what are the important things to call? I'm calling Q icon, Q size from the Qt GUI, and Qt core, which I have mentioned before. There are another important classes, just like the Q application, Q main classes. One of them is to generate an icon, the other one to control the size. And of course, I am calling the Q list widget item, which is creating an item inside a Q list widget. Now, another word to say, if I would have to come to Qt Designer and double click on this, you could see here I could add items to the list. Now these items call Qt list items, but I'm gonna do this as static, but we're gonna do this with a code instead. So let's try to view first of all buttons. All right, inside the buttons, I'm just calling the database. You could see here now I am reaching out database. How to call it? You could see I'm out of two routes. So because this is one route, and then I'm going to the second route, which is the HCC, and then inside here I am getting back to the DB, this guy here, and then inside the DB I'm reaching out to the db main.py, and from there I am importing the database main CLS, which we have just viewed a while ago. All right, so I'm creating a class called button actions, just taking instructor, and I'm calling the super init for it. So this class will be recognized to be actually my main class just running for button applications. Inside here, two important functions, which I found out to be important. Of course, now you are seeing the design is ready, but while you are doing, this thing will come up to you as you are doing your design from coding perspective. I'm just showing you the exact mechanism because I have worked already on that. Instead of wasting your time watching your step how I'm doing this from scratch, you are actually following the progress, and then you can check on your own. So the first one, call add new case to database to list widget. So the names, as I said, conventions are quite important to me. So they can be readable, it can be easy to follow up. So what this function does, it does important thing is to add to the database and to add to list widget. Why? Now, if I would have to get back here to the stack widget, that we have here the view and we have the add. Imagine I added case. So I fill up the information and I click add. And when I click add, this will be added to the database. But at the same time, I want this case that I have just added to be also added in the view case page. So it will be gone in the back end and also added here. Because when I start the application, this list will be populated from what is in the database, but during the session where I am on, I added a case and I want this to be already added here. That's why this function does this for me. Now, how to do that? Well, the operation of this function is not too long. You could see is quite clear. So I add database, I add to list digit item, important things that I have noticed to write for your documentation. And also after you add, you're going to clear the form, meaning to say, done the adding here and the case has been added, I want you to clear these so you don't double click again and add again. So, and finally, of course, you're going to print on the label, as we said, a successful message. Here, actually, there is a label displaying all the messages. So, for example, when you add, you say, well, the case has been successfully. Okay, so we are in session between try and accept. In the try, first of all, I'm going to create instance from the database. And from the database, I'm going to connect to the insert into table. And you remember insert into table, this guy here, this function, it requests you to pass a patient data, which have these information, 5 of them. So here, basically, this function says, well, I want you to go to insert into table. And for the patient data, I want you to pass the case P variable. Now, where does this function receive from case P? Well, it receives when you call this function generally, if you connect to the button function class here, you call this function, insert into database and list widget, you have to pass to me the case that you want to insert. And I will take care to handle connection to the database, inserting there and everything, and return all this process happen in the back end. All right. So the main window basically later on will be calling this and passing to it the case. This is number 1. Okay, done. After you do so, I want you to go and then connect again using the instance database and call the select last from table. Just now, while I was explaining here, I said I found out that I need the last case in the table, which is this guy here. Last from table, this guy. Why? Because the last case I have just inserted, now it is inside and it is the last one. Go and get it. So basically what happens, he insert the case, then he go and again take the same case from there. Instead of that, you could have just used the exact information as it is, but I just wanted to connect again. Why I did this? Because this last record is inserted view case here and also graph it here. Now, what I have retrieved from here, well, if you could see here in the return of the row, I will be retrieving the 5 elements, where the first it's gonna be, since I'm retrieving all, will be the ID. The second will be, actually, as I have inserted them already in order here, so it will be the ID, then the image, and then the age, the description, the image case, the patient status. So these are the orders how this will be retrieving the case back. So what I want you to go and retrieve the first, which is going to represent the ID of the case. Why? Because in the list image, when we populate, we're going to populate case ID and then the ID of the case. For example, case ID 0, case ID 1, case ID 2. So these numbers will be here 0, 1, 2. They will represent the actual ID inside the database. That's why I am retrieving actually 0 entry, which is going to represent the ID. Now I have the case ID name. I create an icon, and you will see why I'm creating an icon when I do the insertion in a while. And then I am adding to the icon image from the icon SVG. Finally, you create a QWidget item, which have the icon and we have the case name. Return true, that means the insertion happened correctly. And then the delete. For example, I am here in the view. I select one case and I click delete. So what will happen when I click delete? Same operation. First of all, I need database index and I need the list widget item. Meaning to say, I'm going to first of all delete it from the database and also from this list widget item as well. So how to do that? Well, if there is a real selection on the list widget item, imagine I'm not selecting any case here and I click delete. What I'm going to delete? Nothing. So I just wanted to make sure that there is really a case has been selected to be deleted, and the click of the delete, there is a case to be deleted. So that's why I'm making condition here. If there is a current item, first of all, get the row, because every item in that list, it has a number. So the index number should be 0, 1, or 2. And then once you do that, now I have an index. Now what I want you to do, I say, well, I want you to go to the list widget item and delete it from the list widget. Now this function take item, what it does basically, it go to that row and delete it from the list widget. But this has happened only on the GUI on this session. So if you run the program again, will populate. So we need to delete from the database itself. So after I done this, I clear the selection and I set the current row to -1. In other words, I want you to imagine that I select one item here and I click delete on it. Well, the item will be gone from here and the selection from the entire list will be gone and set into -1. -1 means no selection here at all. Now, once we're done here, we clear the list widget. How about the database? Well, the database, again, I have an instance of the database main class. And again, I'm reaching out to the delete from table. Well, delete from table, as we discussed before, delete, it requires one important thing. I need a value. And what is value is that? The ID. That's why I'm going to return to you the database ID, which is actually going to be again passed to me once you try to call this delete item and return true. That's it. So here we go. We have the button function up and running and everything is clear. Next one is the list action function. Once again, we just need access to the database and I'm calling PIL for a reason. Let's see what it is. So create a class called list action class with super, and there are two important functions. The first one is called fetch all from database to populate the list widget. We said that here when we start the application, I want to populate this from all the cases. You should be now able to figure out that in the database, the first actually function here, when we said, well, select all from the table, select all, just go ahead, whatever case we have just selected. So basically here, what will happen, this create instant from the database, go to select all from table, retrieve and have the data. So whenever I have connection to this module list action and I access to this function, fetch all from database, it will return for me all the data in the database. Then I can take that and I can populate my list widget item. All right. Next, selected widget item. Well, if I am clicking on one of the items inside this list widget, for example, I select one of them. What does that mean? Number one, Well, I have written here the description exactly what it does. This function, basically, it saves the image to the case and the system folder, etc. So I think if I want to explain this much more in details, well, once we are in action, it will make better sense. But let me just try to show you the main functionality of it. First of all, of course, you have a database class, and I'm calling on it the selector from table. Well, selector from table means I need an ID, and that's why I'm passing here a value of QList item that is selected from the QList widget. If the length of this, it means there is a case that's been really exist and selected larger than 0, right? What I'm going to do, I'm going to loop inside the items that inside this case been selected. Now, why? Because this function selector from table, what it will return for me would return a list of all the element of that case, right? Which the ID, the image name, the image itself, the status, etc. So basically, I'm interested to reach out to one particular element of that, which is number 4, and that represents the image itself. So 0 will be the ID, 1 will be the description, 2 will be the age, and number 4 will be actually the image itself. So I need this image. Why I need this image? What I'm going to do with it? Well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this image, since it is in a blob format. If you remember, we store it as a blob. We need to decode that again back into a form of an image. That's why we are relying on this image that open from the pillow. Then I'm relying on the IO bytes IO image. Okay, so basically I'm converting that binary back into image format. Next, what I'm doing with this image now, I have an image. What I'm going to do with it? Well, I have decided to store this image on a temporary folder called assets, which is actually here. If you remember, while we were exploring the details, I have here image. Now this asset, interestingly, will only be storing one image at a time. Now, interestingly, why I did this? Let us say for simplicity, there's some cases here. Imagine I click on one case, right? Now, what does that mean? When I clicked, I said, well, I have a case now. What happened with that click? It goes to the database and retrieve based on the ID. Now I have data here. It's easy to reach out all the information, but the question is, how about the image? I want to actually display the image as well. Well, I have an option here. I cannot display this image on the fly because it's an image. I have decided actually to take that image and create a temporary store by sort of downloading the image actually by doing this conversion, and fix that image to be stored on this asset folder. That's exactly what it does here. So once again, it goes to the patient image temporary variable and create this path. All right. And from here, what I'm going to do actually, I'm going to do something interesting. Before I say what I'm going to store, I want you to go first inside this asset, which is here the path to it, and I want you to check inside this asset, is there any image exist? If there is, I want you to remove it. This is what I'm going to do. So every time you click one of the image, go to the asset, delete anything inside, which is always will hold only one image at a time, and then store the new image that is requested. This is the easy way. It's a solution, of course, instead of running the image on the memory. So I didn't want actually to occupy much of the memory. Maybe the image could be bigger. For practical reason, I discovered that viewing the image from the PC itself temporarily, it's way better. So in this case, I have less duty on the memory and the CPU. All right. Of course, then once you remove everything, save now the image that we have just recalled from the list image. And once you have done that, what I want you to do is the following. Create an empty list, append all the items of this case that I am selecting and put it here and return it. Why I'm doing that now, the main class, all right, the main window, it will enjoy all the information about the case has been clicked. What I can do with that? Well, everything. Imagine when I click this case here, Now I have the information retrieved from the database literally and stored the image that for this case temporary on an asset. Now the main window will take whatever retrieved from here and display it for me here, plus the image as a thumbnail. That's exactly what this function does. I hope now you're following along and things will be clear while we are executing actually. Now we are done here with the information for all the modules. Now you know what is DB, you know what is inside the action, the asset temporary. Now last thing just I put here inside the model is the main model. If you remember the H5 that we saved before session when we created the AI model. Now this is the AI model. It's an H5. I created here a model HCC.py. Basically what it does, just load that model. So here there is a class called model predict. Basically what it does, it reach out to the model location, all right, and then it call load model, okay, from the Keras processing. Here is where TensorFlow and Keras is actually running the show. You will see later some issues I found out with Keras library build, and these are out of my control. That's why I said you have to be independent in case you need to be in a production line. I mean, this kind of process can be slow, it can be some bugging error. Okay, that's all. So you load the module and then you run something called load the image. So basically, what does this function do? Well, basically it go and retrieve the image from the asset where you want, because we said here when I click on one case, now the image view is in here. Now I have the image case or will be view on from me. This is the image, these are the information, and I want to click predict. We said the predict will go and call the H5. So when you click predict, I want you to go take the image, which is now, it is stored inside this temporary asset. That's why we were doing that temporary. So go bring that image, all right? And I want you to create this load image in the format 200 by 200 by 1. If you remember, this is a grayscale image. So basically what happened, I'm using the load image and I'm passing to it the input of that image. And then basically whatever, after you load the image, convert it into array into that format with this shape. Now this is the shape 200 by 200 by 21. If you remember the essential model when we created, we needed this format. And this number, remember the batch number, right? Here will be only one image at a time, which I'm trying to predict. After you do that, you call the built-in function inside the model, which is called predict. Now don't forget, this is basically the model itself. So inside that model H5, there is this built-in function called predict, and pass to it this image. And whatever the result returned back from the predict, I want you to reach to the 0, which is going to be actually the case of returning 0 or 1. It will just only return 0 or 1. This is the actual module here of a module. Now we have covered all the modules. They are ready, the action, the asset, the DB module, and the UI. And now we are ready to go and actually talk directly to the main window, which is gonna now start to utilize the functionality step by step. Let's go ahead and now explore the main window and how the actual connectivity is happening. That's exactly what we're gonna do next. I will see you then.